Welcome to the Cigar Caucus, where the smoke is real, the discourse is civil, and the friendships run deep. This broadcast was born from a simple ritual, a group of friends gathering over cigars to swap stories, share laughs, and debate the issues of the day. And when COVID scattered us across the map from Florida to D.C. to New York to New Hampshire, we didn't let distance snuff out the flame. The Cigar Caucus went virtual, and what began as a casual circle of camaraderie evolved into something richer, a space for honest conversation across political lines. Here you'll find Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, and everything in between. No shouting matches, no echo chambers, just thoughtful dialogue, a little ribbing, and the kind of respect that only comes from years of shared smoke and shared stories. Whether you're lighting up or just listening in, we invite you to pull up a chair. The Cigar Caucus is open. Today, we light up not just cigars, but stories. And we welcome a man whose journey didn't begin in the halls of Congress, but in the segregated streets of North Carolina and Virginia. Albert Wynn didn't inherit power, he earned it. One campaign sign at a time, one handshake at a time, one policy fight at a time. He's the kind of public servant who didn't mind standing on a corner holding up his own sign because he knew that representation isn't given, it's fought for. And when the map was redrawn, he didn't complain. He said, I've got 170,000 new people to meet. That's not politics, that's purpose. So, Albert, thank you for joining us today. We are honored to have you on the Cigar Caucus. So, I want to begin with, as you were growing up, describe for us the kind of challenges you faced as a young black boy, black man in segregated South in the 50s and 60s. Tell us what you faced a little bit.
Well, thank you. First of all, let me compliment you on bringing us all together as the Cigar Caucus, and for your friendship and for your appreciation of the moment, that maybe some discourse and conversation would make a little sense. So thank you, Senator. We appreciate that. In terms of my upbringing in the South, it was an interesting time, and it was a hard time. I'm not going to mince words today. It was a segregated environment, segregated schools. I can remember my mother always tells a story about taking me to a parade, Christmas parade. We lived in a small town called Warrenton, North Carolina. And she said she was excited because it was going to be good. I was a toddler. And she said I wasn't very enthused. She couldn't figure out why. She said, I said, I don't see anybody in there that looks like me, because the parade was segregated. They had a white Christmas parade, and then they had a black high school homecoming parade. And I was very excited about the homecoming parade because folks looked like me. But the Christmas parade apparently left me a little less enthused. But that was the first realization that something's different here. And so that was the beginning. It was a world you lived in. And so it's not like a lot of the people today, get caught up in this. You accept what was and not what you'd like it to be. My mother, who was a big influence on me, would always, when we go over to see my grandmother, without fail, it actually became a joke in the family, because as we were driving and approaching about a mile or two away from my folks, my mother would always point out, there's the hanging tree. I said, okay, the hanging trees where they hung slaves. Okay. And so that was an early part of our education. After a while, we knew where the hanging tree was, and it wasn't necessary for her to continue to point it out. But for years, I think till a tree fell, she would point out, there's the hanging tree. That's where. So
and that really had been the place they had hanged.
That's where they hung slaves. And this was rural North Carolina, Warren County. And that was the reality. I mean, you grew up with this reality that people during slavery were hung without any legal process or anything like that. And it was difficult, but as I said, we kind of accepted, okay, this is the world we're born into. This is the world we're in. Move forward. We didn't just sit around and discuss it every day. Uh, Different thing. My grandmother, I remember when I left the South. We're living up in Maryland now, my home. But in the summer, 8-year-old, 9-year-old Albert sit back down in North Carolina. I go down. My grandmother says to me, "Okay, I need you to." She's diabetic. She said, "I need you to go pick up my insulin. Now here's the money. You go straight to the back. You don't stop to read comic books. You don't stop to look at anything. Heavens, no, you don't sit at the counter." Well, I didn't understand any of that.
Now, how old were you then?
I'd say probably 8, maybe 9, and I followed her instructions. I got the money, took it, got the medicine, and got out of there. And I wanted to look at comic books or get a donut or something at the counter, but that just wasn't done during that period. Now, thankfully, we made tremendous progress since then, and there've been a lot of opportunities, but there were hard-won opportunities as a result of the civil rights movement.
So I have heard many people, Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, and others who talk about the speech or the talk or you and I have talked about it.
The conversation, yeah.
That about the worry about law enforcement and what might happen. Tell us if you have any experience like that.
Well, I did, and my folks would tell me, said, "Look, keep your mouth shut. Don't talk back. Don't give them any problems, and basically be cooperative because it'd go better for you. It wasn't going to go good for you if you got into a scrape with a law enforcement officer." Now, this was reinforced, Senator, because across the street from my grandparents' house in this little small town, they had the chain gang working. So when I come out to the front porch and sit on the front porch, I look across the street and there was a chain gang, and all these black guys chained together, and a big white guy with a shotgun sitting on a big horse. And I look across the street. I'm low now. This was when I was about 6. I used to go down to my grandma's house, and I said, "Man, I'm never doing anything wrong." That was the biggest deterrent of watching the chain gang across the street from my grandparents' house.
There had to be a lot of scary moments for you.
There were scary moments, but as I say, it was a world you're born. So you didn't think about it the same way. You were aware of it, but you didn't think about it, as I say, in the same way that I do now, having developed a political background.
Now, how did you make your way to Philadelphia?
Well, that's a good question. My father was part of the post-World War II migration of Southern African Americans moving north in search of job opportunities. And so my father was part of that phase after World War II and went to Philly because my uncle lived there, and he said, "We can get you a job at the carpet factory." Well, he got the job, but it didn't take, and I don't know details, but he comes back to North Carolina, but I was born in Philly, brings the family back to North Carolina for about 4 years of dairy farming. Well, I'm sure, coming from Arkansas, you have a sense of dairy farming and how hard it is.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was a tough life. My formative years, 2, 3, 4, I was living on a dairy farm. My first pet was a calf. And so, however,
on our farm, we had one milk cow. That was enough work for me. I can't imagine.
My father was so excited when they got electric milkers, because I think when I was a little kid, he was milking by hand. But anyway, after about 3 years, that didn't take either. So he went up to Michigan to try to find a job in the auto factories. Too cold, comes back down, and then he goes to Washington, D.C., where he got a job with the Department of Agriculture. And that was when we kind of stabilized as a family.
He had a good background for that.
Yeah, he had a background for that. And it it was a stabilizing employment, which changed everything. My mother's a school teacher, and so between the two of them, they were very much in the working class and lower middle class, and moved from D.C. into the Maryland suburbs. There was basically one highway, and along that highway were black suburbs. The rest of the county was predominantly white, but along this one major
Interesting.
highway, it was several
So
suburban
Albert,
communities.
I know you did. I know where you did law school, but and I know that you did some at Howard and Pitt. But fill me in on your educational background.
So I went to undergrad at Pitt, University of Pittsburgh. A great experience, an eye-opening
And
experience.
you still cheer for them in football.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hail to Pitt is our word. But yeah, Pitt was an interesting experience because I'd been in the suburbs and actually hadn't had a whole lot of experience in an urban setting. Pitt's an urban setting, so that was somewhat of an eye opener. But it was a good school, a very activist school. Uh, I was disappointed because when I got there, I was like a year behind the demonstrations where they had at the computer center, and but that was part of the tradition, not tradition, let's say culture of Pitt African American students. We were an extreme minority, uh, but we were active and engaged. And at a point, I was involved in leadership of the Black Students Organization, trying to provide more social life, respond to academic issues, and also trying to get more African American. In fact, basically what you'd call DEI today. That's
All right. How about law school?
law school, more of the same. Matter of fact, some of the debates that people had over law school admissions, I was in the thick of it. Again, I was chair of the Black Law Students chapter at Georgetown, and so I organized a protest. Forgive me, but this you reminded me of this, and it's fun. What I said was, we're going to go. What we're protesting, because it's important to understand the purpose, was a tuition increase, a change from grants to predominantly loans. And I was making the case that this have an adverse effect on African American student recruitment because people who would go to other schools and get grants, like many of the Ivies, for example, have at Georgetown, we would have been saddled with loans. So I was protesting. I was a third year student, so I was on my way out. But what I said was, look, I'm gonna make an
They,
appointment with the president, with the dean of the law school, which I did. I said, but now after I get up there, after about 5 minutes, you guys just start drifting up. Get on the elevators and just drift up. So by the time the secretary called me in and said the dean is ready to see you, it wasn't just me. It was me and probably about 50, 60 other Black law students. And they were just standing around quietly, waiting in the lobby and reception. But the reception area was packed. They'd never seen so many Black students in one place at Georgetown in the dean's office.
you had it all planned out.
Oh yeah, I thought it would be. Well, I wanted to say, okay, this is just not me, because if you go in one of these discussions on race issues and the like, if it's just you, you're at a severe disadvantage. And the question may be, well, is anybody behind this guy? So I figured if everybody showed up, or a significant number of the Black law students showed up, it would be clear that, okay, this was a widely held sentiment that this policy was a bad idea. So it was effective to the extent that it got their attention. It was not effective in changing the policy, unfortunately.
Was was the experience at Pitt, the experience in law school, what was it that lured you into politics?
Actually, I got lured into politics in middle school. Uh,
Really? Just like me.
yeah, you said that one time, and I thought about it. I said, "Yeah, me too." I was a last minute replacement at a conference. It turned out it was a student government conference, and my eyes were opened. I mean, really, my eyes were opened. So this is how it's done. Small group of people make all the decisions for the rest of us. And there are amendments and motions and parliamentary procedure and agendas and all this. And I said, oh, okay. And committees and subcommittees. I'd never been exposed to this. So while a lot of people were focusing on sports, I was focusing on student government. That whet my appetite. From middle school to high school to undergrad and law school, I was always running for something. It could be president, it could be parliamentarian. As long as I was in the room where they were making the decisions, that was what I wanted to do.
That's very, very interesting. It's funny how some people just get the political bug, and I got it very young, and uh, so you served in the Maryland Assembly, both the House and the Senate. I think you spent a decade there, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. What? 4 years in the lower house and then 6 years in the Senate.
Tell me about that. What kind
Uh,
of experience? Because I served 8 years in the Arkansas legislature before I ran for Congress, and I for the most part loved it. Made a lot of friends.
yeah, absolutely. I smiled because that was the height of my political ambition to get into the state legislature.
Me
Uh,
too.
yeah, I just if I could get into in the lower house, as soon as I got in
We
the lower house, I wanted to get into the state senate.
we made it to the pinnacle at that point.
Exactly. All my life goals had been satisfied, and I was a relatively young man. But it was a great experience. I made wonderful friends, many of whom I still engage with today. But I also learned the fundamentals, I think, of politics that have served me well. And I would say maybe lacking today. Uh, the first thing was there are a lot of good ideas, but they got to be paid for. Like many state legislatures, Maryland had a mandatory balanced budget amendment. So every year, at the end of every year, the books have to be balanced, and you can't have a whole lot of red ink. So, and I was on the Ways and Means Committee, which we like to call Ways and Schemes, because in order to balance the book, sometimes you had to use schemes and fees and various and sundry methods, perfectly legal, of course, to balance the books. But I learned about that process, and that was very helpful. The other thing I learned is compromise. I get one, you get one. I get one, you get one. And that's kind of shaped my political philosophy. Uh, Without politics, it doesn't work. I remember an old guy told me, he said, hey, politics is the art of the doable, which means you got to have everybody come together. And that was one thing. I was on one of the tax writing, Ways and Means, of course, but then also on budget and tax, which is on the Senate side. And you learn a lot about how you build things. I remember the Orioles Stadium, for those of you
Yeah.
who follow baseball, Orioles Stadium, that we funded that. And we had a big fight. Education shouldn't be shortchanged for sports facilities. So we went through the economics of that, and the issue, it wasn't just sports per se, but it was economic development and all the ancillary benefits. Those kind of conversations were very helpful to
Is that
me.
the Inner Harbor?
Yeah,
Is
this is
that
where the
the
Orioles currently play. Well, then it was the
yeah
new stadium, but yeah, it's a beautiful stadium, Camden Yards, and
yeah?
yeah, and but that was just an example of the type of things, issues that I was engaged with.
So somebody described you to me as you were principled but pragmatic. And I thought that's a pretty good description for an effective politician. Uh, and what was the partisan breakdown there in the Maryland? It's very Democratic state, of course, but was it back then? And it
It
was
was
the
not as much so, but still overwhelmingly a Democrat. But we had, particularly on the Senate side, there were 44 of us, and we may have had 13 uh, Republicans in the Maryland Senate.
that's about like when I was in the Arkansas House. It was 91 Democrats and 9 Republicans, just the opposite of what you guys had.
Jeez. Yeah, no,
So
but
did you find that in the legislature the ability to have bipartisan solutions and work together was greater than what you experienced when you got to Congress?
oh, absolutely. Again, the pressure of having to have a balanced budget at the end of the session meant we had to get it done. Everybody had some skin in the game in terms of capital projects, bridges, libraries, what have you. So there was a lot of give and take and horse trading. then you had interests like we had the horse racing industry, you had the ag industry. Maryland's a very diverse state. We had the waterman's industry. We have big poultry. Most people don't associate that. Some of the biggest poultry farms commercially are located in Maryland. Um, and so all those competing
Eastern
interests,
Shore.
Eastern Shore, exactly. Uh,
I,
so
I, I remember driving on the Eastern Shore and seeing those poultry farms and thinking I was in Arkansas.
Yeah, that's we call Maryland America in miniature because we have just about every economic engine that you can imagine at some point. We even got a few
So,
mountains in the west with some, they say, a
yeah.
little
So,
oil in them.
Albert, in 1992 comes along. You've been in the legislature for 10 years, and there was a tough seven-way Democratic primary. I want to hear about that, but I want to hear, was it difficult to take the jump in leaving the legislature and taking a gamble on running for the U.S. Congress?
Well, that's the thing, Senator. Really wasn't a gamble because the way the timing works, I didn't have to give up my seat in order to run. And so, as I said, the height of my political ambition was the state legislature. I hadn't been thinking about running for Congress or plotting to run for Congress. They created the district after the 1990 census. It was favorable for an African American, didn't have an incumbent. That's what drove that, and everybody jumped in. It was
So yeah, so you had a uh, seven-way primary. How
seemed
much
like
did you
more,
win
but
by?
I'll take your word for it.
Did you have to get a majority, or could you win with a plurality, or was there a runoff?
1 percentage point.
Wow.
By 1 percentage point. I think I had 28% of the vote. The next guy had 27.
That's amazing. So
He'd been the
it's
favorite. He'd been the
and,
favorite when
and
we
once you
started.
won the primary, it was over.
Done.
You
It
were
was
in.
done. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's 1992. Very historic year. You're in Congress. That's the year I went to the House. Uh, and I'm in the minority. You're in the majority. I understand that year there were 16 African American lawmakers elected, doubling the size of the Black Caucus. Talk about that historic year, 1992.
It was really pretty incredible once I realized it. At the time, I'm just running for office, shaking every hand I could get. But once here, I looked around and I see that it is a surprisingly large number of people, more than I was aware of in terms of African Americans running. We had a very big class, and it changed the tone of the Congressional Black Caucus. Prior to that year, it had been largely urban driven. All the major cities, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, etc., Kansas City. And the African American representation was essentially urban oriented. The year we came in, there was a change. I was a suburban member. Sanford Bishop of Georgia had agricultural interests. Jim Clyburn. So all of a sudden, you're getting distinctly rural issues that the caucus hadn't had to deal with previously. A different point of view, a more rural point of view. You also knew there was someone else whose name escapes me, who was also representing a largely suburban district. And so these changes to the focus of the congressional caucus basically broadened the issues, and broadened the number of things the caucus was involved with.
So, of course, in 94 was a historic year also because in 94 Republicans took control of the
Yeah.
House, and things were really in the Gingrich Revolution. Things were really heating up, and bipartisanship was starting to falter even then. Don't you think?
Yeah, that was the beginning. Well, I don't want to go into the weeds, but I think the Bork Supreme Court nomination, when liberals and Democrats blocked Judge Bork from the Supreme Court was a beginning, because people thought that that was very unfair, and then we came in, got worse.
Now, I failed to mention when I introduced you, and I apologize, you in the House served on the all-powerful Energy and Commerce Committee, or as you like to say, it was all-powerful.
No, my phrase was that it was not that it was all-powerful, but it was powerful and prestigious. The phrase that I used.
So how did you get on that committee? How did you manage that?
Oh, you're going to ask me to divulge trade secrets.
You don't have to answer that.
The speaker controls the committees, right?
Well, the Democratic side,
yeah, okay.
I guess there's a lot of influence on both sides.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's a committee a select committee that points people. But basically, I served my first 4 years, 2 terms, on banking and foreign affairs, and had my eye on, energy and commerce. There was an opening, and also, as you know, it's done by region. So there's a regional opening, a regional seat on the committee. So I was in good shape in that sense, but there were about 5 guys trying to get it. I remember talking to my father, and I said, "What do you think?" He did not know anything about politics. All he said is, "You got to pay to play." I said, He said, "If you want the support, contribute." I contributed to the party. I made a pretty hefty, for that time, it's peanuts now, but at that time, it's a hefty contribution to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I think that turned the tide. I mean, I had good credentials.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And what have you, but everybody up here has good credentials. It's, do you have friends? Do people like you? Have you paid your dues both literally and figuratively?
Well, for those who are listening to the podcast today and may not be as familiar as you and I are, Energy and Commerce and the Ways and Means Committee in the House, probably the 2 most powerful, influential,
I'd say
appropriations.
Yeah,
appropriations probably less so than it once was, because they never get the work done. They always end up with it. But so you, Albert, as I recall, represented the highest concentration of federal workers of any congressional district in the country.
I believe I held that distinction, or near.
What kind of challenge did that present for you? That had to be tough.
It was in interesting respects, because the issue that my people are concerned about are basically employee rights, because most of them work in the federal government system. So you've got, first and foremost, pay and federal employee pay, which very few other members of Congress really cared much about. Benefits, working conditions. Big issue when I came in was discrimination against African American, Hispanic federal employees. So that was my focus based on my constituent basis. My personal interest was in minority business, and so I did a lot of work in that area. And people thought I was on small business committee. I wasn't, but that was something that was interest to both my constituents and myself.
So in 94, Republicans taking over, and we had all the big battle between the Clinton White House and the Congress, and ended up in a government shutdown. Now, you guys did a really effective job at blaming the Republicans for that shutdown. But I remember going back to my conservative district in northwest Arkansas in the Ozark Hills, getting off the plane when I landed in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and there were 100 veterans there to complain about the veterans checks not getting out because of the government shutdown. I suppose, did you get any heat? You were fighting for them, but did...
I laughed because you asked me earlier about representing more federal employees. Well, the time that you're most aware of that is when there's a government shutdown, because they're not getting paid. And as a result of that, when you go to the dry cleaners or the grocery store. Oh, you can afford to buy groceries. My constituents were not happy. It was a very tense time, specifically relating to shutdowns.
Well, Albert, well, this has been, I've enjoyed this thoroughly, and I enjoy your friendship. I'm going to wrap it up in a minute, but before I do, you received a lot of you received a lot of criticism and praise for your bipartisanship, for your willingness to work with Republicans on occasion. I know you received several business awards from business groups who recognized your support of small business. Do you want to just comment on your attitude toward bipartisanship and the current status in Congress when it seems like there's so little done, accomplished, and so little working together?
You know, it really is the issue of the hour in many respects. And that is because if you don't work in a bipartisan fashion, nothing gets done and the people aren't served. And that's a lot of what's happening now. And I don't have any easy answers how you change it, but I think people really have to be realistic and say it can't be I win, you lose. It's got to be I get some, you get some. And people are more concerned now about not letting you get what you want than they are about what they want. And I find that that's a real problem. They want to block you from achieving your objectives more than they want to achieve their own objectives, and therefore they won't compromise. And you know, there've been a lot of examples of that. Go ahead. I see it's a question.
No, I was just thinking, you know, I had a very good friend in the Senate, Mike Enzi. He's gone to his eternal reward, but Mike, and he was the chairman for a while and then ranking member on the Health Committee in the Senate. And Senator Kennedy was they would alternate. He'd be chairman. And they had a deal that if they could agree on 80% of a substance, they'd forget the 20% that they disagreed and they'd pass the legislation. They passed literally scores and scores of bills because they found some common ground. It's, you know, you and I'm a conservative Republican. You're a moderate to progressive Democrat. We differ on a lot of issues, but we find two things. We find friendship and we find some common ground. We love America, so you ought to be able to find common ground. It seems to me that's now that it's shouting at each other and not talking to each other.
You're absolutely right. One of the things that I came to understand, there are a lot of people who come to Washington and think they're supposed to be activists because they're activists back home. And that's nothing wrong. We need activists back home. But Jim Clyburn, who you well know, Democratic Congressman from South Carolina, said in one of those situations, said, look, anybody can be an activist, and it's a good thing. But only members of Congress, elected members of the House and the Senate, can pass legislation. So while you may be a great activist and advocate, you come to Washington to pass legislation. Yeah. And he said, so people need to keep that in mind. And I thought that was very profound, that that was our job, to find common ground, to pass legislation, not to beat our chest, to proclaim our ideology. At least that's the way I look at it.
Well, Albert, I'm honored to call you a friend, and we've got to do this again. We haven't touched any of your years as a lobbyist, and we may have to come back and cover that.
Yeah, I mean, time flew.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, as the smoke settles and the stories linger, we're reminded that politics, at its best, is a human endeavor, and we need more of that kind of human connection and friendship. So until we visit again, light one up, listen well, and keep the conversation going. Thank you, Albert.
It's been a pleasure, Senator.